Peter, we've been hearing all too many stories about loss of life, but this one, I must say, is truly extraordinary. It was Tuesday, September 11th, 8:50 a.m. Ron Clifford stepped into the lobby of a hotel at the base of the World Trade Center's North Tower. In that split second, he cheated death and then stepped into a nightmare. A chain of coincidences so horrific, so improbable, that it seems beyond comprehension.
There was an incredible explosion and a haze of what I thought at the time was diesel fuel. I found out later it was aviation fuel. And through the haze, I saw this silhouette of a woman walking in through the doors where I had been just a few seconds before.
Right where he had been standing, the woman was almost incinerated by burning fuel from the first plane, American Airlines Flight 11, which had just hit the Trade Center's North Tower. It was a wonder she was alive.
Her clothes were burnt to her body. Her face was completely burnt. Her eyes were barely open. Her hair was melted on her head, if you can imagine that.
Clifford doused her with water from a restroom, and a hotel manager administered oxygen from a first aid kit.
She thought she was going to die, and she wanted to pray, so I prayed with her, still screaming and hoping that an emergency worker would come and help us.
Do you think you saved her life?
No, I think she saved my life, which is amazing, because while we were on the floor, there was a second explosion.
It was the second plane, United Airlines 175, hitting the South Tower. They tried to run as others, panic-stricken, ran too. But miraculously, the crowd parted for them.
People were horrified, Connie. Looking back, they saw how burnt this woman was, and they made way for us. So in that respect, I think she saved my life by me being with her, and I figured like running saved her life. We ran to the other side of the street. There were EMS crews waiting to accept her.
Was she able to say anything to you before you left her?
I told her that she just had to live, and just, that's the way I felt.
But if he thought his ordeal was over, for Ron Clifford and his family, the true horror was only beginning. That morning, did you know that your sister was flying to Los Angeles?
No. In the back of my mind, I thought she went the day before.
Ron Clifford's sister, Ruth McCourt, was looking forward to a reunion with old friends in Los Angeles. A vivacious and creative woman, she was born in Ireland and had come to the U.S. as a teenager, partly to get away from the violence there. David McCourt is Ruth's husband.
She had a beautiful Irish brogue. She walked with such grace and dignity. And I knew that I wanted this woman as a part of my life.
On this trip to Los Angeles, she was going with her best friend, Paige Farley Hackle, and one other, Ruth's 4-year-old daughter, Juliana, who had been promised a visit to Disneyland.
If you saw a picture of her, that speaks 1,000 words, with her smile and her fun-loving nature. And people were awed by her beauty. And we couldn't pass anywhere and say, what a gorgeous, beautiful child you have.
The night of September 10th, Ruth and Juliana stayed over at Paige's house outside Boston, preparing for their departure the next day.
She called at 9:30, and they were playing together on the bed, and Juliana wanted to say goodnight to Daddy. I'm real happy, Daddy, and I miss you, and I'll be seeing you soon, okay, Daddy, and I love you. And I said, I love you too, Juliana.
The next morning, unbeknownst to her brother Ron, Ruth, Juliana, and her friend Paige headed for Boston's airport. How did you find out that your sister had indeed flown to Los Angeles?
When I got home, I got a call from my brother Spence telling me that Paige Farley's plane had crashed into the World Trade Center.
Your sister's best friend.
Correct.
It was the first plane to hit the trade towers, American Airlines Flight 11, the explosion that turned the woman Ron had helped into a human torch. And now, for Ron Clifford, horror over the death of his sister's friend turned to agonizing doubt about the fate of his sister. But there seemed to be hope. Ron learned from Paige's husband that, amazingly, Ruth was not on her friend's doomed flight. Before boarding American, she had dropped Ruth and Juliana off at United. Why didn't these best friends fly together? Paige had booked a flight on American. Ruth and Juliana used frequent flyer miles on United.
I thought Ruth was safe because she took United. I called American Airlines to see if Ruth was on American because I figured I hope she didn't switch. And she hadn't. She wasn't on the manifest. They said she wasn't.
Ruth's husband, David, was at work in his Connecticut office when he heard about the disaster.
And it shocked me, and I again, did not have, I had concern, but I had no concern about Ruth. I just didn't connect it.
I called David, and David said that Ruth had an 8 o'clock flight out of Boston. So I wanted to just find out where Ruth was. I called her cell phone. I couldn't get in touch with her.
Ron was concerned, asking me what flight she was on. I said, Ron, to be honest with you, I'm not sure. And then I went up and pulled in her computer file and got the flight of 175. And I said, Ron, I think we're okay at 175. And Ron started crying. He said, David, I think we're in trouble. Because it said a United flight from Boston. What time did it leave? And I said, 8 o'clock. He says, oh my God. And then I knew I was in trouble.
David, flight 175 has crashed. Ruth was on board.
That's what you told David?
That's what I told David.
At that point, I remember seeing the second plane hit the towers, and that was the plane that she was in. And I still couldn't believe it. And Ron and I just started crying.
Two best friends, as close as sisters, and in a bizarre coincidence, each was on a plane that crashed into the World Trade Center. Ron, tell me about your sister.
She was just the most brilliant sister anybody could imagine. She loved life, loved people, loved to bring out the best in people.
What did you love most about Ruth?
It just wasn't one thing, Connie. She was every man's dream to have a soulmate, a person that was your friend you could talk to. She was understanding.
And for David, there is the added grief of losing a daughter, Juliana, the child who wanted to be just like her mother. Their house is so quiet now, but Juliana somehow seems present. Her father can't bear to look at her photographs.
I'll never be able to see this child again. This child will never be in my life. And I can't look at it. She was so beautiful. And it's a way of almost denying, but it's the only way I can cope at this point.
But what about the other woman in this story? The woman Ron Clifford led to safety, even as his niece, sister, and her friend perished in the sky above him. Tonight, Jenny Ann Maffeo is in critical but stable condition in the burn unit of a New York hospital. And Ron Clifford is left to wonder what brought them together that terrible morning and saved both their lives. Perhaps it was fate and something more. There is such an extraordinary sequence of events, and the timing and the juxtaposition is just beyond belief.
I think when I was on the floor, maybe saying the Lord's Prayer with this woman, when the second plane hit, I've gone back to that's where I was when the plane hit. And just in a strange way, I think that maybe Ruth guided me out of there.
A memorial for Ruth and Juliana will be held tomorrow. Meantime, David McCourt has set up a foundation in honor of his daughter. It's called the Juliana Valentine McCourt Children's Educational Foundation. Its goal, to teach tolerance and understanding to children at an early age. Sounds like a great idea, Peter.
Thanks very much, Connie Chung.